I was sitting in my cozy studio apartment watching the rain streak down my window when my phone rang. My mother's voice cut through the peaceful moment like ice water. "You need to move out in 2 weeks," she said without any preamble. I stared at the vintage furniture I had carefully collected, the little herb garden on my balcony, the corner where I worked late into the night building my graphic design business. This was not just an apartment I had been renting from my parents for 3 years. This was my home, my sanctuary, and now Amanda, my pregnant sister, needed it more than I did, according to them. Before I continue this story, where are you watching from? Please hit like if you have ever felt like your family treated you unfairly. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about finding your strength when the people closest to you let you down. Because what happened next taught me that sometimes the biggest betrayals come from the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. I need to start from the beginning so you understand just how deep this cut. My name is Allison, and I am the younger sister in what everyone always called a close family. My parents, Robert and Linda, built a successful real estate business in Denver over 20 years. They owned several properties around the city, including 3 apartments in a beautiful brick building near downtown. When I graduated college and started my freelance graphic design career, they offered to rent me the smallest unit at market price. I was thrilled to have my independence while staying connected to family. Amanda, my sister, is 2 years older than me and has always been the golden child. Growing up, she got the bigger bedroom, the newer car, the college fund that never seemed to run out. I learned early that keeping the peace meant accepting less and being grateful for it, but I was genuinely happy when I got my own place. The apartment was small, but perfect for me. 600 square feet of possibility that I transformed into something magical. I spent months hunting for the perfect vintage furniture at estate sales and thrift stores. Every piece told a story. The robin egg blue couch I found at an antique shop in Boulder. The oak dining table I rescued from a garage sale and refinished myself. My grandmother's china cabinet that my parents let me take from storage. I created a home office by the large window where natural light poured in during the morning hours. The light was so perfect that I could work without turning on a lamp until well past noon. The crown jewel was my balcony garden. I grew basil, rosemary, and mint in terracotta pots. Cherry tomatoes climbed up a small trellis I built. Petunias and marigolds added splashes of color. Every morning I would water my plants with my coffee, watching the city wake up below. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived across the courtyard, would wave from her kitchen window. Ruby, a nurse who worked night shifts in the unit next to mine, would sometimes join me for evening conversations on her nights off. I paid my rent on time every month, $550, which was fair for the location and size. I never missed a payment, never asked for favors, never caused any problems. My parents would drop by occasionally, always commenting on how nice I had made the place look. My mother would run her fingers along the surfaces I kept spotless and nod approvingly. My father would check the smoke detectors and make sure everything was working properly. We had Sunday dinners at their house most weeks. Everything felt stable and good. Then Amanda called with her news. Her voice was bubbling with excitement as she told me she was pregnant. I was genuinely thrilled for her. Amanda had always wanted children, and at 29 she felt ready to start a family. She had been dating Marcus for 2 years, and they had gotten engaged 6 months earlier. Marcus was a software engineer with a steady job and a kind personality. I liked him immediately when Amanda first introduced us. He was thoughtful and funny, always remembering details about my work and asking follow-up questions about projects I was working on. The following Sunday, our family gathered for dinner to celebrate the pregnancy news. Marcus joined us, and I could see how happy Amanda was as she showed off her small bump and talked about nursery plans. My parents were over the moon about becoming grandparents. My father kept patting Marcus on the back and talking about teaching his grandson to fish. My mother was already planning baby showers and discussing which bedroom in their house would make the best nursery for visits. During dinner, the conversation turned to practical matters. My mother asked Amanda if they needed any financial help during the pregnancy. My father immediately offered to waive their rent for a few months so they could save money for baby expenses. I felt a small prick of annoyance because no one had ever offered me any rent breaks, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was about celebrating new life, not comparing treatment. But then Amanda started complaining about their current apartment. She said it was too small for a baby, too noisy with thin walls, and the neighborhood did not feel safe for raising children. She mentioned that they had been looking at other places, but everything in their budget was either too far from Marcus's job or in worse condition than what they had. As she talked, I noticed her glancing at me with an expression I could not quite read. There was something calculating in her eyes that made me uncomfortable. My mother nodded sympathetically and started asking questions about what size apartment they really needed. Amanda painted a picture of needing multiple bedrooms, a quiet environment, and a safe neighborhood where she could push a stroller without worry. As she described her ideal home, I realized she was essentially describing my apartment building and neighborhood, but surely she was not thinking about my specific unit. It was too small for a couple, let alone a family. Or so I thought. The call came on a Monday morning in October. I was working on a logo design for a local coffee shop, completely absorbed in choosing between two color palettes when my phone buzzed. My mother's name appeared on the screen, which was unusual. She typically called in the evenings or on weekends. Her voice was different from the moment she spoke. Gone was the warm tone I was used to. Instead, she sounded businesslike and distant. "Allison, we need to talk about your apartment." She began without any pleasantries. My stomach immediately clenched. Those words carried a weight that made me stop breathing for a moment. "Amanda and Marcus need a place to live that is suitable for the baby. Your apartment is perfect for them. You need to move out in 2 weeks." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I stared at my computer screen where the cheerful coffee shop logo mocked me with its bright colors. "What do you mean I need to move out?" I asked, my voice sounding strange and far away. "I have been living here for 3 years. I pay my rent on time. This is my home." My mother's response was cold and final. "The decision has been made. Amanda is pregnant and needs a stable environment for her family. You are single and can live anywhere. They cannot. This is what is best for everyone involved." The way she said everyone made it clear that I was not included in that group. I tried to argue, to reason with her, to explain that 2 weeks was not enough time to find a new place and move all my belongings. But she had already thought of answers for everything. I could store my furniture in their garage temporarily. I could stay in their guest room while I looked for something new. Or better yet, I could find a nice studio apartment since I did not need much space anyway. Every solution she offered showed how little she understood or cared about what this meant to me. The conversation ended with her telling me that Amanda and Marcus would be by on Saturday to look at the apartment and measure for their furniture. She said this as if it was already a done deal, as if my feelings and my life did not matter at all. After I hung up, I sat in my chair for an hour, unable to move or process what had just happened. Everything I had built, everything I loved about my life was being taken away to benefit my sister. I drove to my parents' house that evening, hoping that seeing them in person might change something. Maybe my mother had been having a bad day. Maybe she had not thought through how devastating this would be for me. Maybe we could find another solution that worked for everyone. My father was in his home office when I arrived, sitting behind his massive oak desk, covered with property listings and contracts. When I walked in, he looked up briefly but could not meet my eyes. That told me everything I needed to know. This decision had come from both of them, and he was just as committed to it as my mother was. My mother was in the kitchen, aggressively cleaning counters that were already spotless. She did not stop her scrubbing when I started talking. I explained how much the apartment meant to me, how I had made it into a home, how unfair it was to give me only 2 weeks' notice. She listened with her back to me, continuing to clean. When I finished talking, she turned around with her jaw set in that stubborn line I knew so well. "This is what is best for the family," she said, as if that phrase was supposed to end all discussion. "Amanda is starting a family. She needs our support. You are young and flexible. You can adapt." That was when Amanda appeared in the doorway with Marcus behind her. My sister looked uncomfortable but determined. There was guilt in her eyes, but also a resolve that told me she was not going to back down. "Allison, I hope you understand that I need this more than you do," she said quietly. "I am going to be a mother. I need a safe place to raise my child." Marcus stood behind her, studying the floor. I could tell he felt bad about the situation, but he was not going to speak up against his pregnant fiancé. I realized that I was completely alone in this fight. It was me against my entire family, and I had already lost. The next 2 weeks were a nightmare blur of packing, apartment hunting, and dealing with the reality that my family had thrown me out to make room for my sister. Every box I packed felt like I was erasing a piece of myself. When I took down the small gallery wall of my favorite design work, I cried for the first time since this whole thing started. Finding a new apartment in 2 weeks was nearly impossible. Everything in my price range was either tiny, dirty, or in a neighborhood that made me nervous. Rent prices had gone up significantly since I signed my original lease 3 years earlier. I finally found a basement studio apartment in a converted house 20 minutes from downtown. It was dark, cramped, and cost $300 more per month than what I had been paying my parents. But it was available immediately, and I was desperate. Moving day was heartbreaking. Mrs. Patterson came over with homemade cookies and tears in her eyes. She told me how much she would miss our conversations and made me promise to visit. Ruby helped me load boxes, shaking her head at how unfairly I was being treated. Both of them said what my own family had not, that this was wrong, and they were sorry it was happening to me. My parents did not help me move. Amanda and Marcus showed up while I was loading my car with the last of my plants. Amanda tried to apologize, but her words felt empty. She was getting what she wanted. Why should she feel genuinely sorry? Marcus at least looked ashamed and offered to help me carry some boxes, but I declined. I did not want their pity or their guilt-driven assistance. Life in my new apartment was a struggle from day one. The basement studio was everything my old apartment was not. The single small window barely let in any light, so I had to keep lamps on constantly. The concrete walls made everything echo, and I could hear every footstep from the people living above me. The space was so small that I had to get rid of half my furniture. My beloved oak dining table went to a consignment shop. My grandmother's china cabinet was stored in my parents' garage, along with boxes of books, artwork, and kitchen items that no longer fit. The rent increase meant I had to take on additional freelance projects just to pay my bills. I was working 12-hour days, barely leaving the dim apartment, except for grocery runs and client meetings. My health started to suffer. I was not sleeping well because of the noise from upstairs neighbors. I was not eating properly because my tiny kitchen made cooking difficult. The depression that settled over me was like a heavy blanket I could not shake off. Contact with my family became sporadic and strained. My parents called occasionally to check on me, but the conversations were superficial and awkward. They never asked if I needed help adjusting to my new place. They never acknowledged that they had completely upended my life. Amanda sent a few text messages saying she hoped I was settling in well, but she never invited me to see what she had done with my old apartment. It was as if they all wanted to pretend that what they had done was normal and fine. I threw myself into work because it was the only thing that made sense anymore. At least when I was designing logos or websites, I felt competent and valued. My clients appreciated my creativity and professionalism. They paid me on time and treated me with respect. It was a stark contrast to how my own family had treated me. 3 months after the move, I was walking through my old neighborhood on the way to a client meeting when I ran into Mrs. Patterson at the grocery store. Her face lit up when she saw me, and we chatted about how I was adjusting to my new place. I was honest with her about the difficulties, and she listened with the kind of genuine concern I had not received from anyone in my family. Then she said something that stopped me cold. I was so surprised when Amanda and Marcus moved out last month. She mentioned casually while examining tomatoes. I thought they would stay longer since they went through all that trouble to get the apartment. Ruby and I were wondering if you might move back in since it is empty now. My blood turned to ice. What do you mean they moved out? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Patterson looked confused by my reaction. She explained that Amanda and Marcus had moved out 4 weeks earlier. A moving truck had come on a Saturday morning and they had loaded up all their belongings. She had not seen them since. I felt like I might faint right there in the produce section. Do you know where they went? I managed to ask. Mrs. Patterson nodded and said she had heard from Ruby that they bought a house in the Highlands neighborhood, a beautiful 3-bedroom place with a big yard perfect for a growing family. After Mrs. Patterson and I said goodbye, I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot trying to process this information. Amanda and Marcus had only lived in my apartment for 2 months. They had thrown me out, turned my life upside down, and destroyed my sense of security for 2 months of temporary housing. They had gotten what they really wanted, which was time to find and buy their dream house, and they had used my home as a stepping stone to get there. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had felt during the initial move. It was bad enough that they had prioritized Amanda's needs over mine, but to discover that it had all been for nothing, that my sacrifice had been completely unnecessary, was devastating. If they were planning to buy a house, why had they not just stayed in their original apartment for a few more months? Why had they needed to destroy my stability for such a short period? That evening, I checked my bank statements and discovered something even more infuriating. My rent payments to my parents were still being automatically deducted from my checking account. I had completely forgotten to cancel the automatic transfer when I moved out. My parents had been collecting rent money from my old apartment for 3 months while it sat empty. They were essentially being paid by both their daughters for the same property. This discovery ignited something in me that had been dormant since this whole nightmare started. For the first time, I felt angry instead of just hurt. I felt used and manipulated, and I was not going to tolerate it anymore. I immediately called my bank and canceled the automatic transfer. When the representative asked if I wanted to try to recover the past payments, I said yes. I was done being the accommodating daughter who accepted whatever scraps were thrown her way. 2 weeks after I stopped the rent payments, I received a call from Amanda. She sounded nervous and emotional when she asked if we could meet for coffee. I almost said no, but my curiosity was stronger than my anger. We met at a small cafe near my new apartment, and Amanda looked exhausted. Pregnancy was clearly taking a toll on her, but there was something else in her expression. She looked guilty and scared. Over coffee, she told me things that turned my entire understanding of the situation upside down. She said that moving into my apartment had not been her idea originally. My parents had suggested it when she complained about her living situation, but once they planted the seed, they had pressured her relentlessly to ask for the apartment. They told her that I would not mind moving since I was single and flexible. They convinced her that this was what good families did for each other. Amanda admitted that she had felt terrible about asking me to move, but my parents had made it seem like the only reasonable solution. They had even implied that if she did not take advantage of this opportunity, she would be foolish and ungrateful. The pressure had been constant until she finally agreed to go along with their plan. But the worst part of Amanda's confession was what happened after they moved into my apartment. She said my parents had immediately started pushing them to find a permanent place quickly. They made comments about how the apartment was really too small for a baby anyway. They suggested that Amanda and Marcus should be looking for houses instead of renting. The message was clear: my apartment was just a temporary solution, and they needed to move on to something better. Amanda started crying as she told me how manipulated she felt. She realized that my parents had used both of us to get what they wanted, which was having their pregnant daughter close by temporarily, while maintaining their rental income from my continued payments. They had orchestrated the entire situation without caring about how it affected either of their daughters. As we sat there, both of us crying and angry, Amanda pulled out an envelope. "I wrote this letter to them last week," she said, sliding it across the table. "I have not sent it because I am scared of how they will react, but I think you should read it." The letter Amanda had written to our parents was brutal in its honesty. She had poured out all her anger and disappointment about how they had manipulated the apartment situation. She accused them of using her pregnancy as an excuse to control both their daughters. She wrote about feeling like a pawn in their game and being disgusted with how they had treated me throughout the entire ordeal. In the letter, Amanda admitted that she had known the apartment was too small for a family from the beginning. She had gone along with taking it because my parents convinced her it was temporary and that I would not mind the inconvenience. But she had quickly realized that the whole situation was designed to benefit our parents financially rather than help either of their daughters genuinely. She wrote about discovering that they had continued collecting rent from me even after I moved out. She called this theft and said she was ashamed to be related to people who would steal from their own daughter. The letter ended with Amanda demanding that they pay me back the money they had taken and that they apologize for their manipulation of both of us. Reading that letter was like having puzzle pieces fall into place. Everything my parents had done suddenly made sense as part of a larger pattern of controlling and manipulating their daughters for their own benefit. Amanda and I talked for 3 hours that afternoon, sharing stories about how our parents had played us against each other over the years. We realized that they had been dividing us and using us our entire lives. I made a copy of Amanda's letter before giving it back to her. She decided not to send it because she was afraid of causing permanent damage to her relationship with our parents while she was pregnant and vulnerable. But holding that letter felt like holding a weapon. It was the truth written in Amanda's own handwriting about what our parents had really done. 6 months after I had moved out of my apartment, 6 months of struggling in my basement studio and working extra hours to pay the increased rent, my father called me. His voice was different from the cold businessman tone my mother had used to kick me out. He sounded older and uncertain. "Allison, we need to talk about the apartment," he said, and I almost laughed at the irony of those words. "We are having some cash flow problems with the business. The economy has been tough, and we have had several vacant properties that are not bringing in income. We were hoping you might consider moving back into your old apartment and resuming your rent payments." I listened in silence as he explained their financial difficulties. The real estate market had taken a downturn, and they were struggling to maintain their lifestyle and business expenses. Several of their rental properties had been empty for months because they had been holding out for higher rents that no one was willing to pay. They needed the steady income that my prompt payments had provided. When he finished his explanation, there was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, waiting for my response. Finally, he said, "We know this situation has been difficult for everyone, but family needs to help family in tough times." I almost started laughing. The audacity of their request was breathtaking. They had thrown me out of my home to benefit my sister, collected rent money from me while the apartment sat empty, and now wanted me to rescue them from their financial problems by moving back in and paying them again. They had not offered any apology for what they had put me through. They had not acknowledged that they had done anything wrong. They just wanted me to fix their problems like nothing had happened. But I did not argue with my father on the phone. Instead, I told him I would need some time to think about it and that I would get back to him soon. After we hung up, I sat in my dim basement apartment and thought about what I wanted to do. For the first time in months, I felt powerful instead of victimized. I knew exactly what I was going to send them instead of money. Amanda's letter was sitting in my desk drawer, a perfect explanation of what they had done and how it had affected both their daughters. Let them read their older daughter's words about their manipulation and greed. Let them see that I was not the only one who had been hurt by their actions. Let them understand that their behavior had consequences they had not anticipated. I made a photocopy of Amanda's letter and wrote a short note to accompany it. "This is what I can offer you right now," I wrote. "Nothing else. No explanations, no arguments, no emotional outpouring. Just the simple truth that instead of money, they would receive honesty about what they had done." I mailed the envelope on a Thursday morning and felt lighter than I had in months. I was not being cruel or vindictive. I was simply showing them exactly what their actions had cost them. They had lost the trust and respect of both their daughters through their greed and manipulation. Amanda's letter said everything I could have said, but it carried more weight because it came from the daughter they had favored. The phone calls started 3 days later. First, my mother demanding to know how I had gotten Amanda's letter and why I was trying to destroy the family. Then my father attempting to be conciliatory and asking what I wanted from them. Then Amanda herself crying because the letter had caused a massive fight and she was caught in the middle. I did not answer any of the calls. I had said everything I needed to say through Amanda's words. The letter spoke for both of us about how we had been used and manipulated. There was nothing left for me to add to that conversation. For the first time in my life, I had refused to be the peacemaker, the accommodating daughter who smoothed over family conflicts by accepting less than I deserved. The aftermath of sending Amanda's letter created exactly the chaos I had expected, but it also brought unexpected peace. My parents' angry phone calls gradually stopped when I refused to engage with their demands for explanations. They had been confronted with the truth about their behavior, written in their favored daughter's own words, and they could not argue with it or manipulate their way out of it. Amanda and I started talking regularly, again bonding over our shared experience of being manipulated by our parents. She was dealing with her own guilt about the apartment situation, but she was also angry about how our parents had used her pregnancy as a tool to control both of us. We began building a relationship based on honesty instead of the competition our parents had fostered between us for years. I started seeing a therapist to work through the family trauma and learn how to set healthy boundaries. Dr. Williams helped me understand that my parents' behavior was part of a long pattern of emotional manipulation that had been happening my entire life. I had been trained from childhood to prioritize their needs and Amanda's needs over my own, to be grateful for whatever attention or resources they shared with me. Through therapy, I learned that what I had experienced was a form of emotional abuse. My parents had systematically taught me that my needs did not matter as much as everyone else's, that my role in the family was to be accommodating and grateful for whatever I received. The apartment situation was just the most extreme example of something that had been happening to me for 26 years. As I worked through these realizations, I also focused on rebuilding my professional life. The extra hours I had been working to afford my increased rent had actually led to several bigger projects and long-term clients. My freelance business was more successful than it had ever been. I was earning enough money to move to a better apartment, one with actual windows and a real kitchen. I found a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in a restored Victorian house near downtown. It had hardwood floors, high ceilings, and large windows that filled the space with natural light. The rent was higher than what I had paid my parents, but it was worth every penny to have a home that felt safe and beautiful again. This time, I was renting from a professional property management company with clear lease terms and tenant rights. Moving into my new apartment felt like reclaiming my life. I bought new furniture that fit the space perfectly. I painted the walls colors that made me happy. I created a home office with even better light than my old apartment had offered. Most importantly, I felt secure knowing that no one could take this space away from me on a whim because they decided someone else deserved it more. My relationship with my parents remained strained but stable. They eventually stopped trying to get me to move back into their apartment or resume paying rent. I think they realized that they had lost their power to manipulate me, and they were not sure how to relate to me without that dynamic. We exchanged holiday cards and occasional text messages, but the close family relationship we had once had was permanently damaged. Amanda gave birth to a healthy baby girl in the spring. I visited her in the hospital and fell in love with my niece immediately. Amanda and I were able to enjoy becoming an aunt and watching my sister become a mother without the toxic interference our parents had always brought to family relationships. We set boundaries around what information we shared with our parents and how much access they had to the baby. The financial problems that had prompted my parents to ask for help continued to worsen over the following year. They ended up selling 2 of their rental properties and downsizing their own home. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, but I also felt no obligation to rescue them. They had made choices that prioritized short-term gain over their relationships with their daughters, and they were living with the consequences of those choices. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that losing my apartment was actually the catalyst I needed to stop accepting poor treatment from my family. For years, I had been trained to be grateful for scraps and to never rock the boat. Being forced out of my home was so extreme and unfair that it finally broke through my conditioning and showed me that I deserved better. The letter I sent instead of money was not about revenge. It was about truth. My parents needed to understand that their actions had consequences and that they could not continue manipulating their daughters without losing our trust and respect. Amanda's words carried weight that mine never could because she had been their favorite, and even she was disgusted by what they had done. I learned that sometimes you have to lose relationships in order to save yourself. My parents and I may never have the close bond we once had, but I am no longer living in fear of their disapproval or constantly trying to earn their love through compliance. I set boundaries, stick to them, and accept that not everyone will be happy with my decisions. My apartment now feels like a true sanctuary because I chose it freely and pay for it with money I earn through work that fulfills me. No one can take it away from me because someone else needs it more or because I have failed to be sufficiently grateful. It is mine because I have built a life that can sustain it. The most important lesson from this experience was learning to trust my own feelings instead of letting other people define what I should be grateful for or accepting of. When my parents told me that being kicked out was reasonable and fair, my gut knew it was wrong. Learning to listen to that inner voice and act on it has transformed every aspect of my life. Amanda and I now have the honest, supportive relationship we never could have had while we were being pitted against each other by our parents. We talk regularly, share parenting advice and business ideas, and support each other through life's challenges. Our parents' manipulation had been keeping us apart, and breaking free from that allowed us to become real friends. Sitting here in my beautiful apartment surrounded by furniture, I chose an art that makes me smile. I understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's harmful behavior. My parents needed to face the truth about how they had treated their daughters, and sending them that letter forced them to do exactly that. I still think about what they did sometimes, especially when I am watering the plants on my sunny balcony or working at my desk by the large window. But instead of feeling angry or hurt, I mostly feel grateful. Grateful that I learned to stand up for myself. Grateful that Amanda and I found our way to each other. Grateful that I built a life I love instead of settling for whatever other people thought I should accept. The question I would ask anyone listening to this story is, have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and keeping your self-respect? Have you ever realized that the people who claim to love you are actually using that love to control you? Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth and let the consequences unfold naturally. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment, sharing your own experiences with difficult family dynamics. Hit like if you believe that standing up for yourself is worth the temporary discomfort it might cause. Subscribe for more stories about finding your strength in challenging situations, and share this with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment than what they are accepting. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you have the power to change relationships that no longer serve your well-being. Sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved.